6,000 throats stopped mid-prayer at the same instant. Lieutenant Marcus Corbett felt his jaw lock, the words of the Litany of Dawn dying somewhere between his tongue and teeth. Around him in the pre-dawn darkness of the parade grounds, the entire 47th Valdorian Rifles stood frozen in perfect stillness, hands still clasped, heads still bowed, but silent, completely, impossibly silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle of boots on rockcrete, not a single completion of the final verse they had recited together every morning for 37 years of regimental history. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Sergeant Elijah Draven, 3 rows behind Marcus, began to scream. The sound tore through the formation like shrapnel, high and raw, and utterly unlike any noise Marcus had ever heard from the grizzled veteran. Others followed. Men collapsed. Some ran, though there was nowhere to run to, and most stopped after a few paces as if they had forgotten why they were moving. Corporal Travis Whitfield dropped his prayer book and pressed both palms against his temples, whimpering something about his grandmother's face, about how her eyes had been wrong, how they had always been wrong and he had never let himself see it. Marcus stood paralyzed, not by shock, but by something else, something that felt like a door opening in a room he had never known existed inside his own skull. Through that door came a sound, not the screaming of his regiment, something beneath it, a frequency that existed somewhere between hearing and knowing, and it said, "We are awake now," in a voice that was not a voice, in words that were not words. And Marcus understood with the clarity of absolute horror that the voice was not speaking to him. The voice was him. The 47th Valdorian Rifles had been deployed to Absolution Prime for 11 months. Standard garrison rotation, nothing remarkable about the assignment, nothing noteworthy in the mission parameters. Hold the northern mining settlements. Maintain order. Await relief elements scheduled for the following spring. The kind of duty that career guardsmen complained about in mess halls across 1,000 worlds, the slow death of boredom that made actual combat seem almost preferable. Marcus had arrived with the rest of 3rd Company, transferred in from the 112th after that regiment's near annihilation on Kestros 4. A survivor, a known quantity. His service record showed 19 years of continuous deployment, 3 campaign ribbons, 2 commendations for valor, and precisely 0 disciplinary actions. The kind of soldier that regimental command loved to acquire. Reliable, professional, utterly unremarkable in every way that might attract attention. He had not questioned a transfer. Guardsmen did not question transfers. They went where they were told, served where they were assigned, and died when their number came up. The Imperial Guard was not an institution that rewarded curiosity about one's own circumstances. But in the weeks following the incident on the parade grounds, Marcus began to question everything. The regiment did not collapse into chaos. That was the first wrong thing. 6,000 men had experienced a collective psychic event, a mass hallucination or vision or whatever the Medicae officers were calling it in their carefully worded reports. And yet within hours the 47th had returned to something resembling normal function. Officers issued orders, soldiers obeyed, patrols went out, patrols came back, the machinery of military occupation ground forward, as if nothing had happened, as if they had all agreed, without speaking, that nothing had happened. Marcus caught himself doing it, drafting his morning reports with the same dry prose he always used, omitting any mention of the event, feeling no compulsion to include it. The words simply did not occur to him. His fingers moved across the cogitator keys and produced sentences about supply requisitions, about perimeter integrity, about the satisfactory performance of his platoon. Normal sentences, appropriate sentences, the kind of sentences that would never prompt a follow-up inquiry from regimental command. He finished the report and sent it before he realized he had not made a single conscious decision about its contents. That night, in the officers' barracks, he found Captain Dennis Harwell sitting alone in the common room, staring at his own hands as if he had never seen them before. Harwell was 3rd Company's commanding officer, a man Marcus had served under for 6 years, a man whose competence and steady temperament had kept their unit cohesive through 3 major engagements and a dozen minor actions, a man whose face now wore an expression Marcus had only seen on soldiers In the immediate aftermath of catastrophic trauma, sir? Harwell did not look up. Corbett, sit down. Marcus sat. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant hum of the barracks, atmospheric processes, and the occasional creak of settling metal. Harwell's hands remained in his lap, palms up, fingers slightly curled. "I've been trying to remember my parents," Harwell said eventually. "My mother's face, my father's voice. I have memories of them, I know I do. Childhood memories. Learning to walk. My father teaching me to strip and clean a Las rifle. But when I try to focus on the specifics, it's like looking at a pic capture that's been left in the sun too long. The details are there, but they're faded, wrong. Like someone else's memories that got put in my head by mistake." Marcus said nothing. He was thinking about his own memories. His mother's name was Sarah. She had worked in a textile manufactorum on Valdoris Prime. She had smelled like machine oil and the cheap synthetic soap they issued to low-tier workers. He could remember her face, could he? "The commissar shot 3 men this morning," Harwell continued. "Deserters. They tried to take a supply truck and drive south toward the starport. Said they needed to get off world. Said something was wrong with them. Said they could feel something in their heads." "I heard the shots. Did you report it?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer and found that he genuinely did not know. Had he filed a report? He could not recall. The morning had happened, he was certain of that, and things had occurred during it, but the specifics were arranged strangely in his memory, out of sequence. Some moments vivid and others conspicuously absent, like teeth missing from a smile. "The commissar," he said instead. "Brennan. Did he seem normal to you during the parade grounds incident?" Harwell's hands clenched. Brennan stood at attention through the entire thing, never moved, never spoke. When it was over, he simply walked away. Didn't look at anyone, didn't say a word. "That's not normal. No, it isn't." Harwell finally looked up, and Marcus saw something in his eyes that might have been fear or might have been something else entirely. "But I didn't report it. And neither did you. And neither did anyone else in the regiment. And we should ask ourselves why that is, Corbett. We should ask ourselves why 6,000 soldiers experienced something unprecedented, something that would normally result in immediate quarantine and inquisitorial involvement, and not one of us has sent word to anyone outside this garrison." Marcus found that he did not want to think about that question. He found that his mind actively resisted engaging with it, sliding away from the implications like water off a treated surface. The evasion was automatic, instinctive, as if something within him had decided that certain thoughts were not permitted. He went back to his quarters and lay awake until dawn, listening to the sound that was not a sound, feeling the presence that was not a presence, and understanding with growing certainty that whatever was happening to him had been happening for much longer than 11 months. The dreams started on the 3rd night. Marcus stood in darkness, complete, absolute darkness, the kind that did not exist in the cramped reality of guard barracks and patrol routes and generator-lit mess halls. The darkness had texture to it, a living warmth that pressed against his skin like breath. He was not alone in the darkness. He knew this with the same certainty he knew his own name, though he could not see or hear the others. They were there, thousands of them, breathing in synchronicity, waiting for what? The answer came not in words, but in sensation, a pulling in his chest, a magnetic tug toward something vast and incomprehensible lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Something that was coming, something that had always been coming, something they had been preparing for without knowing they were preparing, each action and decision and thought aligned toward a purpose that none of them had consciously understood. Until now, Marcus woke with the taste of copper on his tongue and a name echoing in his thoughts, a name he had never heard before but which felt more familiar than his own, the Star Children. He did not report the dream. He discovered, without surprise, that he could not have reported it even if he had wanted to. The words would not come. When he tried to write them down, his hand produced different words, innocuous words, words about equipment maintenance and patrol schedules. His own body had become a prison, and the warden was something that lived in the spaces between his thoughts. Over the following days, Marcus began to notice things he had somehow failed to notice before. The regimental chaplain, Father Nathaniel Cross, had stopped performing the standard Imperial services. The morning prayers continued, but the words were different. Subtle variations that passed without comment. Verses that spoke of patience and emergence and the glory that awaited the faithful when the stars aligned. Marcus listened to these prayers with the rest of his company, his lips forming the responses, his voice joining the chorus, and felt no alarm whatsoever at their content. The alterations seemed natural, correct, as if the old prayers had been the wrong prayers all along, and now they were finally speaking the truth. He found himself attending evening services that he had no memory of deciding to attend, found himself kneeling in the regimental chapel alongside hundreds of other soldiers, chanting in a language that should have been unknown to him, but which flowed from his tongue with the ease of a native speaker. The chapel's aquila had been removed from the wall behind the altar. In its place hung a banner bearing a symbol he recognized with the same dreamlike familiarity that now attended all his strangest moments, a coiled shape, something between a serpent and a spiral, rendered in purples and blues that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. He looked at that symbol and felt peace. He felt belonging. He felt, for the first time in his adult life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And some small part of him, some dwindling fragment of what he had been before the parade grounds incident, screamed silently that this was wrong, that something had been done to him, that he was no longer himself and had perhaps never been himself, and that he needed to run, to fight, to die if necessary. Anything other than kneeling here in this violated chapel, while his humanity bled away one prayer at a time. That part of him grew quieter every day. The regiment received new orders on the 19th day. Marcus stood in the command briefing alongside the other company officers, watching Colonel August Brennan outline the tactical situation with the same methodical precision that had characterized his leadership for as long as anyone could remember. Brennan was an old soldier, 40 years of service, a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen the worst that the galaxy could offer. He spoke without notes, his voice flat and professional, and everything he said was completely insane. The mining settlement at Extraction Point 7 has reported unusual activity in the deep shafts, Brennan said. Seismic disturbances, missing personnel. We are deploying 1st and 2nd battalions to investigate and secure the site. 3rd Battalion will hold the garrison. 4th Battalion will establish a perimeter around the starport. Captain Harwell raised his hand. Sir, the starport perimeter, are we securing it against external threat, or are we preventing departure? Brennan's expression did not change. Both. Sir, I need to note for the record that this deployment leaves us significantly extended. If there's a genuine security threat at Extraction Point 7, we should be consolidating our forces, not spreading them across 4 separate objectives. Noted, Captain. Brennan turned to the tactical display, and Marcus saw that his hands were trembling slightly. Not with fear, with something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. The deployment stands. We have waited too long for this moment to allow tactical orthodoxy to interfere. No one questioned that statement. No one asked what moment he was referring to, or what they had been waiting for, or why the commanding officer of an Imperial Guard regiment was speaking like a cultist on the eve of some profane ritual. They simply accepted the orders, filed out of the briefing room, and began preparing their companies for deployment. Marcus found himself assigning squads and checking equipment and issuing instructions with the same calm efficiency he had displayed throughout his entire career. His body moved through the motions of military command, while his mind observed from an increasingly distant vantage point. He was watching himself function, watching the thing that wore his face and used his voice and possessed his memories go about the business of preparing 6,000 men for something that was not warfare, could not be warfare. Because warfare did not require the strange symbols being painted on the hulls of transport vehicles, did not involve the low chanting that had replaced marching songs, did not feel like this. This felt like pilgrimage. The convoy departed at sunset, 3,000 soldiers moving in column toward the distant mountains where Extraction Point 7 pierced the crust of Absolution Prime. Marcus rode in the lead vehicle of 3rd Company's transport section, watching the orange light fade from the horizon and feeling the sound beneath his thoughts grow stronger with every kilometer they traveled. The Star Children. The name pulsed through him like a second heartbeat. They were closer now. He could feel their presence in the earth beneath the vehicle's treads, a vast and patient intelligence that had been waiting for unimaginable years, and their waiting was almost at an end. Beside him, Sergeant Draven was humming, the same melody that Marcus had been hearing in his dreams, the same frequency that had replaced the screaming on the parade grounds. Other soldiers in the vehicle were humming too, their voices joining in unconscious harmony, and Marcus realized that he had been humming as well. The convoy rolled on into darkness, and the thing that waited in the mountains began to stir. They reached Extraction Point 7 at the dead hour of night. The mining settlement was exactly what Marcus had expected, a cluster of prefabricated structures huddled around a central processing hub, all of it coated in the grey dust that characterized operations on this mineral-rich but otherwise unremarkable world. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, casting harsh shadows across rockcrete and corrugated metal. Refinery stacks belched chemical smoke into a sky that showed no stars. What Marcus had not expected was the total absence of resistance. The settlement was supposed to be garrisoned, 200 mining security personnel, mostly armed overseers, and a handful of actual soldiers, on loan from PDF reserve units. The briefing documents had described them as potentially compromised, as needing to be neutralized before the regiment could access the deep shafts. Marcus had prepared his platoon for a firefight, or at least for the careful clearing operations that accompanied any entry into hostile territory. Instead, the settlement's gates stood open. The security personnel lined the main thoroughfare in orderly rows, weapons discarded, hands raised not in surrender but in greeting. Some of them were weeping. Many of them were praying, the same prayers that Marcus had been learning in the violated chapel, the words that spoke of patience and emergence and the glory of the Star Children. They were family. The thought arrived in Marcus's mind with the force of revelation. He looked at these strangers, these miners and overseers and petty administrators, and recognized them the way he recognized his own reflection. They carried the same signal in their blood, the same purpose in their altered genes, the same voice in the spaces between their thoughts. They had been waiting, just as the regiment had been waiting, and now the waiting was over. Colonel Brennan's transport pulled to the head of the column. The old soldier dismounted, and Marcus saw that he was no longer trembling. His face wore an expression of absolute serenity, the look of a man who had spent his entire life searching for meaning and had finally found it in the last place he expected. He walked toward the settlement's leaders with his arms spread wide, and the gesture was not military, was not imperial, was something older and stranger and infinitely more sincere. "Brothers," Brennan said, "sisters, the hour approaches." The settlement's administrator, a woman whose name Marcus did not know but whose face felt as familiar as his own, stepped forward and embraced the colonel. Around them, soldiers and miners mingled freely, the distinctions of rank and role dissolving in the shared recognition of what they truly were. 3rd Company's platoons broke formation without orders, moving toward the central processing hub and the shaft entrances beyond, with the purposeful coordination of a single organism. Marcus followed. He could not have done otherwise even if he had wanted to. The sound beneath his thoughts was deafening now, a chorus of anticipation that drowned out everything else, and he walked toward the yawning darkness of Shaft 7 with the certainty that he was walking toward his destiny. The shaft dropped straight down into the planet's crust, a cylinder of reinforced rockcrete and industrial lighting that plunged past natural stone formations and artificial support structures, and eventually into something else entirely. The lifts carried soldiers down in groups of 50, and with each descent, Marcus felt the signal grow stronger. Whatever was down there, whatever had been calling to them since before they were born, it was close now. Close enough to touch. The lift reached the bottom, and the doors opened onto a cavern that should not have existed. Marcus stepped out into a space vast enough to swallow cathedrals, a subterranean void whose ceiling was lost in permanent darkness and whose walls pulsed with a faint bioluminescence that cast everything in shades of pale purple and sickly green. The floor was not stone, it was organic, a surface that yielded slightly beneath his boots and emitted a warmth that felt almost mammalian. Structures rose from this living floor, ribbed columns, arched formations, clustered growths that might have been buildings or might have been body parts, all of it grown rather than built, all of it unmistakably alien. And at the center of the cavern, where the bioluminescence was brightest and the organic floor formed a natural amphitheater, there was a shape. Marcus had never seen anything like it. No human being had ever seen anything like it and remained human afterward. The shape defied easy categorization, a mass of chitin and flesh that towered over the gathered soldiers like a monument to evolutionary nightmare. Multiple limbs, multiple sensory organs, a body that seemed to shift between configurations even as Marcus watched, as if it had not yet decided what form to take. And from this shape, from the thing that sat at the heart of the colony's hidden purpose, emanated the signal that had guided them all to this moment. The patriarch. The name came unbidden, carried on the current of shared consciousness that now connected every mind in the cavern. The first of us, the source, the promise of transcendence. 3,000 soldiers stood in the presence of their god, and not one of them felt anything but joy. Father Cross moved through the crowd, his vestments discarded, his face transformed by an ecstasy that made his previous devotion to the Imperial creed seem like pantomime. He climbed the organic steps to where the patriarch waited and knelt before the alien intelligence, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast space. "We have gathered as promised. The children are ready, the fleet draws near. Soon our faith will be rewarded, and we shall join our true family among the stars." The patriarch moved. One of its limbs, a structure that combined the delicacy of a surgical instrument with the mass of an industrial crane, reached out and touched the chaplain's bowed head. Cross shuddered. His back arched. A sound escaped his lips that might have been pain or might have been pleasure or might have been something for which human language had no adequate term. When he rose, his eyes had changed. The irises had elongated, darkened, taken on the same alien geometry that characterized the patriarch's own sensory organs. He turned to face the assembled regiment, and Marcus saw that his smile now contained too many teeth. "The Star Children have heard our prayers," Cross announced. They come, and we shall be the hands that prepare the feast." The regiment answered with a single voice, a chorus of 6,000 throats speaking words that were not words in any human language. Marcus heard his own voice among them, felt his mouth shaping sounds that his mind did not recognize, and understood that this was the moment of total commitment. Whatever he had been before, whatever fragments of independent thought had survived the long corruption, they were dying now. Being absorbed, being repurposed, he was becoming part of something larger, something perfect, something that had been waiting in the darkness beneath 1,000 worlds for millions of years, patient and hungry and eternal. The transformation should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The days that followed existed in a kind of fever dream. Marcus worked alongside his brothers and sisters to prepare the settlement for what was coming. They fortified the perimeter, not against external threat but against interference. They rigged the communications arrays to broadcast false reports to Imperial authorities, reports that described routine operations and uneventful patrols, and nothing whatsoever unusual about the mining settlement at Extraction Point 7. They converted the processing facilities into something else, something that Marcus's human education could not quite comprehend, but which his deeper nature recognized as necessary. Birthing chambers, feeding troughs, the infrastructure of predation on a planetary scale. The security personnel who had greeted their arrival revealed themselves to be fourth-generation hybrids, born on Absolution Prime to parents who had been infiltrated decades earlier. Their genetic alterations were more advanced than those of the regiment, their bodies further along the path toward the hybrid ideal. Some of them no longer looked entirely human. Marcus found this comforting rather than disturbing. They were simply further along the journey. closer to perfection. He began to notice changes in himself as well. His spine had developed additional flexibility, allowing him to move in ways that would have been impossible weeks earlier. His eyesight had sharpened, particularly in low light conditions. He no longer needed to sleep in the conventional sense. Instead, he entered a kind of trance state that left him refreshed and alert after only a few hours. His skin had taken on a slightly waxy texture, and when he examined himself in the reflection of a polished surface, he saw that his jaw had begun to elongate. He did not mind. The changes were gifts, signs of favor from the patriarch and the greater intelligence it served. Every alteration brought him closer to his true nature, stripped away another layer of the false humanity that had constrained him since birth. But some part of him, that dwindling fragment that still remembered what he had been, catalogued these changes with mounting horror, tracked the dissolution of his identity, counted the days until Marcus Corbett would cease to exist entirely, replaced by a thing that wore his face but served an alien appetite. This part of him made a decision. On the 7th day after the descent, Marcus stood watch on the settlement's eastern perimeter. The duty was largely ceremonial now. The regiment had long since abandoned any pretense of military discipline in favor of the cult's internal hierarchies. But old habits died hard, and something about the rhythms of sentry duty helped Marcus maintain the illusion of normalcy that his deteriorating psyche desperately needed. The stars were visible tonight, a rare occurrence on Absolution Prime's dust-choked atmosphere. Marcus stared up at them and tried to calculate which direction the Imperial core lay, which smear of light might represent the segmentum where he had been born, where his mother had worked her shifts in the manufactorum, where the thing that called itself his father had first infected her with the genetic payload that would eventually produce a son, who was never quite human. His mother's face. He had been trying to remember it for days. The image that surfaced now was sharper than before, clearer, but it was not what he had expected. Her eyes had the same elongated irises that he now saw in his own reflection. Her smile had contained the same excess of teeth that marked Father Cross's transformed visage. She had been first generation, a cultist long before he was born, and she had raised him with all the careful conditioning that the patriarch's children received, preparing him for this moment without ever revealing its nature. His entire life had been a lie built on a foundation of alien purpose. Marcus reached for his las pistol. The weapon was standard issue, well maintained despite the regiment's collapse into cult practice, and it sat in his holster with the familiar weight of 19 years of service. He drew it slowly, feeling the cold metal against his changing palm, and pressed the barrel against his temple. The voice in his head screamed, not words, pure psychic force, a blast of compulsion that locked his muscles and froze his finger on the trigger. He could feel the patriarch's attention turning toward him, vast and cold and absolutely intolerant of dissent. He could feel 6,000 minds responding to the disturbance, brothers and sisters looking up from their labors, orienting toward his position, preparing to intercede. "You are ours," the voice said. "You have always been ours. There is no escape. There is no death that we will not reclaim. Put down the weapon. Return to your duties. Serve." Marcus tried to squeeze the trigger. Every fiber of his being that remained human, that remembered what it felt like to have a self, focused on that single action. 1 centimeter of movement, 1 pulse of superheated light, 1 moment of defiance before the end. His finger would not move. The compulsion was absolute. His body belonged to the hive now, even the parts that still dreamed of resistance. He stood, paralyzed while soldiers approached, while hands gently removed the las pistol from his grip, while voices murmured reassurances that sounded like prayers. They led him back to the birthing chambers where the patriarch waited, and as he walked, he felt the last fragments of Marcus Corbett begin to dissolve. What remained was something that had his memories, but no longer cared about them, something that wore his face but smiled with an alien's satisfaction, something that knelt before the patriarch and received its blessing, and rose knowing exactly what it was and what it was for, a tool, a soldier, a child of the stars, waiting for its true family to arrive. The fleet came on the 15th day. Marcus stood on the processing hub's observation deck, watching the sky fill with shapes that his human education could not process, but which his deeper nature recognized with visceral joy. Vast organic vessels, each one a living cathedral of chitin and membrane, and repurposed flesh, descending through Absolution Prime's atmosphere with the inexorable patience of predators who knew their prey could not escape. The Tyranid Hive fleet had arrived, and the feast was about to begin. The regiment formed up in the settlement's central plaza, 6,000 soldiers standing at perfect attention in formations that mocked their former military precision. They wore their Imperial uniforms still, the aquillas and regimental insignia intact, but the faces beneath the helmets were changing, elongating, perfecting. Some of the more advanced hybrids had begun to sprout additional limbs, their bodies accelerating toward configurations that would make them more useful in the consumption to come. Colonel Brennan stood before them, his own transformation nearly complete. His skull had stretched into a shape that was no longer human, and his voice, when he spoke, contained harmonic frequencies that caused the gathered hybrids to shiver with shared anticipation. "The Star Children have arrived," he announced. "Our purpose is nearly fulfilled. We have prepared this world for them. We have weakened its defenses, subverted its communications, gathered its resources. When the ships land, we will guide them to the population centers. We will open the gates. We will ensure that no soul escapes to warn the Imperium of what is coming." He paused, and Marcus felt the patriarch's attention pass through the assembled regiment like a searchlight, touching each mind, confirming each loyalty. The alien intelligence was pleased. Its children had served well. "Some of us will be consumed in the feeding," Brennan continued. "This is not death. This is communion. Our biomass will join the hive, and through it, we will become part of something eternal. Those who survive will travel with the fleet to new worlds, new targets, new opportunities for service. Either way, we will never be alone again." The regiment responded with a sound that was not a cheer, but something stranger, a harmonic resonance that expressed concepts for which human language had no words. Joy at submission, ecstasy at dissolution, the profound relief of creatures who had spent their entire existence in disguise, finally revealing their true natures. Marcus made the sound with them. His throat produced frequencies he had never known it could generate. His mind merged with the minds around him, boundaries dissolving, individuality becoming irrelevant. He was Marcus, and he was Draven, and he was Harwell, and he was Cross, and he was 6,000 others. All of them part of the same organism. All of them serving the same purpose. The first of the great ships touched down beyond the perimeter, and the things that emerged from its flesh gates were beautiful. Warrior forms, feeder beasts, processing organisms whose sole function was the efficient conversion of planetary biomass into nutrients for the hive. They moved with the terrible grace of creatures perfectly adapted to their ecological niche, and that niche was extinction, the consumption of worlds, the harvesting of everything that lived and thought and dreamed. Marcus led his platoon toward the nearest population center, a hab block 3 kilometers south that housed approximately 15,000 Imperial citizens. They traveled in convoy, the same vehicles they had used for garrison patrols, and the soldiers sang as they rode, not Imperial marching songs, something older, something that existed beneath human consciousness, in the genetic memory of creatures that had been serving the hive since before humanity learned to walk upright. The Hablock's defenders never had a chance. They saw the regimental insignia on the approaching vehicles and assumed rescue. They opened their gates. They welcomed the soldiers in, and then the soldiers changed, revealing what they had always been, and the screaming began. Marcus did not participate directly in the killing. His role was coordination, ensuring that the feeder beasts had clear access to the richest concentrations of biomass, that no one escaped to spread warning. He watched his brothers and sisters work with an efficiency that would have horrified his former self, and felt only satisfaction at a job well done. A child ran past him, a girl of perhaps 8 years, her face streaked with tears and blood that was not her own. She looked up at Marcus with eyes that still held hope, that still believed a man in an Imperial uniform might help her. "Please," she whispered. Marcus watched her for a moment, then he stepped aside to let the warrior form that had been tracking her complete its work. The girl's scream cut off mid-breath, and Marcus felt nothing at all. This was communion. This was purpose. This was what the 47th Valdorian Rifles had been created for. The consumption of Absolution Prime took 3 weeks. Marcus existed in a state of continuous function throughout, his human need for rest and sustenance overridden by the psychic imperative of the hive. He moved from settlement to settlement, city to city, ensuring that the harvest proceeded according to the patriarch's design. He watched entire populations march willingly into the processing vats, their minds subverted by the psychic dominance that the hive fleet projected across the planet. He saw resistance crushed, hope extinguished, humanity reduced to its component nutrients. The regiment suffered casualties. Some soldiers fell to the desperate defensive actions of those few Imperial forces that had not been subverted. Others were consumed by friendly organisms that did not distinguish between the harvest and its servants. But these losses meant nothing. The biomass was recycled. The purpose was served. On the final day, when Absolution Prime surface had been stripped to bare rock, and the last of its organic resources had been processed for transport, Marcus received a summons. He found the patriarch in the remains of the planetary governor's palace, a structure whose imperial grandeur had been repurposed into a node of the hive's distributed consciousness. The alien intelligence had grown since Marcus had last seen it, fed on the psychic energy of billions of consumed souls, and its presence now filled the chamber with a pressure that would have destroyed any untrained human mind. Marcus knelt before his god and waited. The patriarch's attention settled on him like a physical weight. He felt it examining his memories, his experiences, his service record, evaluating him, measuring his worth against the standards of the hive. "You have served well," the voice said. "Your lineage is strong. Your conditioning has held despite proximity to full awareness. You are suitable for continuation." Marcus felt something that might have been pride. "I exist to serve. You will travel with the fleet. You will infiltrate another world. You will create another generation of children, and when the time is right, you will guide them to their purpose as you have guided this one. The cycle will continue. The hunger will be fed." "I understand." But the voice was not finished. "There is one more task, a test of your commitment, a demonstration of your complete submission to the will of the hive." The patriarch gestured with one of its many limbs, and a door opened in the organic wall of the chamber. Through it walked a figure that Marcus recognized immediately, though he had not seen her in 19 years. His mother. Sarah Corbett had aged, her face lined with decades of service to the cult, her body showing the signs of advanced hybridization that characterized third-generation infiltrators. But her eyes were the same. The elongated irises that Marcus now shared, the patient hunger that had watched over his childhood, guiding his development, preparing him for this moment. "My son," she said. Marcus stood. He walked toward her with the same purposeful stride that had carried him through the consumption of a world. He felt her presence in his mind, the familiar signal of family, the genetic bond that had shaped him since before his birth. She opened her arms to embrace him. "The hive requires proof," the patriarch said. "Family bonds are useful during infiltration. They must be severed before you can serve as an infiltrator yourself. You must demonstrate that the hive is your only family now." Marcus understood. He had known on some level that this moment would come, the fragment of him that had tried to pull the trigger on the perimeter, the last remnant of whatever humanity he had once possessed, stirred briefly in recognition of what was being asked. He drew his combat knife. His mother's expression did not change. She had known too, had prepared for this since the day she birthed him, since the day she first felt his infant mind connect to the greater consciousness of the cult. She knelt before him with the same serenity that Colonel Brennan had shown in the cavern beneath Extraction Point 7. "I am proud of you," she said. "You have exceeded all expectations. The Star Children will reward our lineage with continuation. Our genes will spread across the galaxy. This is the purpose for which I was created and for which I created you." Marcus looked down at the woman who had raised him, who had taught him to walk and speak and serve, who had infected him with the genetic destiny that now consumed everything he might have been. He saw the love in her alien eyes. He felt the connection between them, child to parent, infiltrator to source. He drove the knife into her heart. She died with a smile on her face, her blood staining his hands, her last breath carrying words of benediction in the language of the cult. Marcus held her body until it stopped twitching, then laid it gently on the organic floor of the chamber. The patriarch's approval washed through him like warmth. "You are ready, you are ours, you will serve." Marcus stood. He wiped the blade on his uniform, sheathed it, and turned to face his god. "Where do you send me?" The answer came not in words but in images. A world, green continents and blue oceans, cities sprawling across fertile plains, billions of souls living and breeding and completely unaware of what lurked in their midst. The next target, the next harvest. Marcus committed the coordinates to memory. He walked out of the chamber, past the recycling pools where his mother's body was already being processed, into the harsh light of Absolution Prime's sterilized surface. A transport waited to carry him to the hive ship that would bear him to his new assignment. He boarded without looking back. The transport lifted off, carrying him toward the stars that had always been his true destination. Below, the dead world fell away, and Marcus felt nothing but anticipation for the work ahead. 6,000 soldiers had discovered what they truly were. Now one of them carried that truth to a new world, where the cycle would begin again, where children would be born with alien genes, raised with alien purposes, and trained to serve an alien hunger, where another regiment would be created, another population subverted, another planet prepared for consumption. The hunger of the hive was eternal. The patience of the hive was infinite. And Marcus Corbett, or the thing that had once worn that name, would serve that hunger until the stars themselves went dark. He watched the void pass outside his viewport and hummed a melody that was not human. Somewhere in the black, the fleet sang with him. Somewhere in the future, another world waited to learn what it meant when the Star Children came. The regiment had found its purpose. The harvest would continue.